Hey, what's up? Okay, today we're going to be talking about a 1980s vigilante slash action film called The Exterminator. Now, before I even go into it, if you Google up anything about this movie, it has been considered everything from an action movie with no action to a Death Wish wannabe. It is actually far from the case. In fact, I really enjoyed the film. It is about. Well, first of all, let's go into some details about it before I summarize the plot. First of all, this was released and it had to have several cuts included because it was a very violent piece of action cinema or a disgusting, violent revenge picture, depending on how you look at it. It was actually trimmed so bad in other countries that basically most of the violent content in this film had disappeared. Upon Wikipediaing this thing, I discovered that the number one selling point was the action. When they asked when they asked the director why he put the violence in there, he said that basically the story and the violence came from the fact that the Vietnam War was still fresh in people's minds in 1980. And it would make sense because that was the Reagan era. That's where, we had all this stuff going on, more so than we did today, obviously. Things were more mainstream now, I guess. Uh, Trying to think here. Director James Glickenhaus actually made the movie about a man and his best friend who escaped Vietnam, and they are working at a meat packing slash beer distributor. And this film really descends really quickly into depravity and violence because our main character, John Eastland, played by Ted McGinley, I'm sorry, Robert Ginty, not Ted McGinley. Ted McGinley was the guy on Revenge of the Nerds, sorry. Um, Basically, they are attacked by a group of street punks known as the Ghouls. And they kind of fight them off. And two scenes after that, we see the Ghouls take down Robert Eastland's best friend, puts him in a coma. Savage attack. From then, the picture descends onto basically Robert Eastman, or John Eastland's character rather, waging a one-man war against crime in New York City. Now, as I told you in the beginning of this review, this was from the 1980s. A lot of things that were portrayed in it had to be pulled. One such scene was the killing of a mob boss. John Eastland's character, the exterminator, actually lowers him into a giant meat grinder and, well, you guessed it, turns him into Italian sausage, if you will. There's also really savage, violent encounters. There is a beheading that's pretty graphic in the very beginning that sets the tone. So it seems like in every other frame they are trying to saturate you with violence. But when you compare it to pictures like Death Wish or The Punisher, it really fits into that category. So it's nothing that we haven't seen before. Now, Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times actually quoted this movie as being a sick example of an unbelievable descent into gruesome savagery in American films. Well, here's the thing. You put a headline out like that, it's going to turn off parents, but turn on children and kids. Kids are going to want to see this. So, it really is a very violent picture, even considered by today's standards. Now, The other thing this film is criticized for is the fact that it's a revenge thriller and an action movie where the action is replaced by gruesome deaths. Well, again, like I just said, considering, movies like The Punisher with Dolph Lundgren or Death Wish with Charles Bronson was almost the same type of affair. I think this one was a little bit too violent and they decided to criticize it just a tad bit more. But the one thing that actually makes this film look seedier than I guess it really is the New York backdrop. Everything's shot in either a slum, a dark alley, or a crane yard at the end, finale. So it has the look going for it, and it really looks like, the environment is portrayed very well in this film. Trying to think. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here, guys. The profanity level for the 80s was actually pretty high in this film. There's some nudity too, which brings me to another point. The nudity almost keeps up with the profanity, but the violence is the real star here of the show. And, you kind of feel for John Eastland's character because he did lose his best friend. His best friend saved him in Vietnam, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago. And that just pretty much sets him off. I think, the character's main strength here is PTSD, combat shock. That's pretty much what he does. But I'm telling you guys, there is all kinds of shootings, car bombings, all kinds of stuff in here. Now, at the end of the film, for just a minute, you are led to believe that the main character is dead. But I hate to say it, he's not. Now, based on the reception of this film, it garnered a pretty good chunk of change at the box office in 1980. It was released in September of 1980, believe it or not, guys. And it actually warranted a sequel, which we will cover tomorrow, where John Eastland takes on street gangs with an armored garbage truck retrofitted with machine guns, missiles, and God only knows what else, because this was the 80s, and hey, we're going to be as violent as possible here. There is a lot of violent content that was actually cut. I believe it was about 4 or 5 minutes long, and it wasn't really like what you would call excessive. Like in the beginning scene, the guy gets his head decapitated in Vietnam, and I guess in the theatrical cut, just to give you an example, the head, they showed the guy getting decapitated, then they cut away from it. In this one, you see the head hanging off the shoulders. There is a scene with a smoldering curling iron that's used to torture a prostitute, but you see more of it. There is, I think, there's a few more gore spots. I know the scene I just told you about the mob boss being lowered in the meat grinder was cut short. But it's either here nor there, but the more violent copy does make sense. Because I think, to get an idea of the violence that went on in this film, you need the uncut version. Theatrical, you might cut away from it and it might lead you going, okay, how nasty was that attack? But honestly, as a fairly good revenge thriller, or anyone who likes the movie Death Wish, the franchise with that, will actually get a kick out of this one. And I was really surprised with not having a lot of big name actors. This thing was pretty amazing. It moved pretty quick when it moved. It has some side stories going on for it. Christopher George plays Detective Dalton in the film. And his character has a whole arc where he's going out and trying to romance a nurse. And then he comes upon the exterminator, and then at the end of the movie finds out who he is. You have his best friend, who really is the whole purpose this movie's going on, because once John Eastland and his best buddy, once his best buddy's taken away from him, that's like everything he had. And like I said, when you read about this film, you know, there's a lot of things going against it. Like I said, you've had critics savage it because of violence. You've had, you know, you've had people calling it, like I said, a descent into the depravity of cinema. You've had, almost a paper thin storyline. But again, when you look back at it, for the 1980s, this kind of movie was prevalent. I think it holds up pretty well. I just think it's not a recognizable title. Like you say Death Wish, you automatically think Bruce Willis or Charles Bronson. You say, you say The Exterminator, people go, huh? So I think it's recognition. But honestly, check it out now. Synapse Films has put this out uncut, and I suggest you pick it up, because who knows, with the way things are going and politics is running, maybe they're going to start pulling videos like this. Now, the other cool thing I want to mention is the video cover for it. Shows John Eastland in his trademark motorcycle hat with a flak jacket with looks like a flamethrower. I remember seeing pictures of this in my video store, in the box cover, the VHS cover art. And I thought, dude, that would make a badass movie. And knowing nothing about the movie, I was like, dude, that should be about a guy just like wiping out everybody left and right and left. No storyline. Or it looked like a science fiction thing, because you see the Exterminator, you're like, dude, does he fight like giant cockroaches or not? No, this is straight up action to the max, but with little action. And I'm not saying that works against the film or not. I'm saying it moves slow, picks up when there's any kind of violent action going on, but then drops. And yes, there was a sequel warranted. And we will talk about that tomorrow. But if you're looking for like a kickback action movie that is in the vein of Death Wish, definitely check out The Exterminator. Do a lot of reading on this before you do, because let's see. Trying to look for the theatrical cut. So the uncut version is 102 minutes. So I'm guessing that the theatrical cut with the censored gore scenes in it would probably be like 93 to 95 minutes long. Just my opinion. But one person, Synapse Films, actually classifies this as one of the most cold-blooded and controversial revenge films of all time. And quite frankly, it is. Because John Eastland's character, the Exterminator, or Robert Ginty's character, John Eastland, the Exterminator, put that out there, doesn't have much of a personality. He doesn't have a one-liner, and that works. Because this boy is just a cold-blooded, methodic revenge seeker. So definitely check this movie out. I really didn't think it was ever going to be as good as what it is. And I would have had this movie review up, but I had to run somewhere, and I had to come back and finish the movie to put this review out, which shows you how much I really enjoyed it. The other thing I like is the camera work in this film. The camera work is a combination of the first-person style and aerial shots, which I really love the way they shot New York City. In fact, from the opening credits, they make New York feel like a place to go. And right after the pre-Vietnam sequence before the credits, and then they flash to this, it's almost like a Tarantino moment where you go, real heavy action. Oh, we're going to let you sit back for a minute. And then bang, 5 more minutes into it, you're thrust into, an attempted robbery, a mugging, and then it just goes from there. So it does have that effect. In the whole movie, you can see slight waves of, okay, there's nothing going on in the screen. There's no killing. There's no nothing. So we'll relax, and all of a sudden, boom, something happens, and then it gets your eyes peaked up, and you're like, all right, what's going to go on? So that works for the film. So necessarily action all the way through it really wouldn't work for this film. But what you need is, just the way the formality was. And rounding out the cast, you have Samantha Eggar. Samantha Eggar, I believe, was the nurse lady. So everything comes full circle. So this was a pretty violent film. We'll see if the sequel lives up to the same amount of violence as this one. But like I definitely just said, it is well worth a watch. And even by today's standards, it's a bit shocking to see. And you can really, after you watch this film, understand why this character did go on this revenge trip. Now, there is a lot of unanswered questions here. But really, for the sake of the story, none of these really matter. You're just focusing on John Eastland, Robert Ginty's character, and his quest to get everybody involved of, harming his best friend in Vietnam. So that's a sum up of The Exterminator, and it was a really kick-ass movie, guys. Violence, glory, and you know what? It's fair to note that after the Bruce Willis version of Death Wish, I haven't seen a movie quite like this, because this is a formula, guys, that isn't being made now. They don't make movies like this. Death Wish, Miss 45. They're all movies, and the way that these are shot and the way that these are put together, you hardly see them anymore. So watching something like this is like actually going back to the Reagan era and throwing all of this in your face and saying, remember. So definitely check out The Exterminator. I really liked it. I give it about maybe 4.5 stars out of 5 just because I dug it. And it's not the greatest revenge film ever made. Don't get me wrong. But it's well worth definitely checking out. See you tomorrow for The Exterminator 2.